I'm completely convinced that in order to understand the essence of slashers, it's enough to understand just two films, which are the inspirations for the entire genre. The pioneering film is considered to be the film Phycho by the cult director Alfred Hitchcock. Yes, it's more of a thriller or even a detective story, but it was this film that inspired a huge number of works with its story, which film critics would later call slashers. The psychoanalytic film is familiar to most thanks to the charismatic and slightly shy guy named Norman Bates, who grew up under the overprotection of his mother and turned into a serial killer. If among the story Mama's Boy are the standard, then this will definitely be Norman's story.
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
The influence of Mother Bates was so strong that she literally settled in his head and controlled her son's behavior even after her death. And at the end of the story she completely became the dominant personality, finally replacing Norman, which naturally makes the viewer ask himself the following question after watching it. Which of the two is the killer, mother or son? Did Norman as an individual have any motive to kill a young girl that he genuinely liked? It's unlikely, but his mother, as again a separate personality in his head, had such a motive.
I won't have you bringing strange young girls in for supper. By candlelight, I suppose, in the cheap erotic fashion of young men with cheap erotic minds. Go on, go tell her she'll not be appeasing her ugly appetite with my food, or my son. Or do I have to tell her 'cause you don't have the guts? Huh, boy? You have the guts, boy?
The conflict here seems to be between generations, but it occurs in the mind of one individual. Part of a young guy wants to be around girls, talk to them and fall in love, but the second one feels embarrassment, shame, guilt and even disgust. The first aspiration belongs to Norman, the second was introduced by his mother. The guy ends up completely losing any remnants of autonomy, turning into a tool in the hands of his mother.
They're probably watching me. Well, let them. Let them see what kind of a person I am.
Before killing Marion in the shower, Norman removes a painting of sexual assault from the wall and spies on her undressing, which hints to us that the massacre was preceded by sexual arousal, which in turn became the trigger for awakening the wrath of his mother. The violence in Phycho is clearly sexual, and its origins lie in the past, in the Bates family house. This is a huge old mansion with Victorian furniture, paintings of virgins and Cupid statues, which already indicates to us the special atmosphere that once reigned within these walls. The Victorian era is a period of extreme modesty and austerity in the history of sexuality. This is a period of diligent suppression of sexual behavior and everything connected with it. For the most part, this concerned naturally female sexuality. Norman is already a mature guy, but judging by the abundance of toys in his room, he is still a child inside his body. Full maturation and separation are simply impossible without sexual maturity and freedom of expression. And all this was completely denied by his mother, whose moral standards were at the level of mid-19th century. Here everything is according to Freud's theory, the neglected Oedipus complex and the mother's always warm bed, suppressed sexuality flowing first into neurosis and then violence, debasement of unconscious and many other details. But Phycho isn't just about a crazy guy named Norman and the love of his life. Let me remind you that the character comes to the fore only from the middle of the film. Its first half was entirely devoted to a woman named Marion Crane. By understanding the dynamics of this character well and drawing parallels from it to Norman, one can arrive to the main idea of Phycho. Marion's story began in one of the US cities within the walls of an unremarkable building. She's in a bed with a man named Sam Loomis. Two meet in an expensive hotel secretly, since they are not married. This behavior was considered highly obscene in the 1960s when the film was released. So much so that it was the first to show something like this on the big screen, and Hitchcock had to work hard to achieve it. Sam is happy with their periodic meetings for sex, but not Marion, who seeks to legitimize their relationship, which clearly hints at the different approach to the relationship between women and men at that time. Let's say a man can drink and, being married, publicly flirting with a girl. It is hardly possible to imagine the opposite situation.
He was flirting with you. I guess he must have noticed my wedding ring.
A woman would be convicted for such a thing and her reputation would be seriously damaged. It is taboo to her to express her desires so freely. It's the same as with Norman Bates. There is a physiology and personal desires, but there is also another force, represented in the form of a certain voice in the head, which forces you to suppress these desires and be ashamed of them. For Norman, it is the voice of his dead mother. For Marion, it is the voice of those around her, like the boss or the policeman. She hears them more than once along her journey. The girl decides to commit a crime and steal $40,000, which should help Sam solve all his problems and finally marry her. Alas, the man is deeply in debt after the death of his father and has obligation to pay alimony, which makes his marriage to Marion impossible. As you can see, the past factors men in the present in a slightly different way, but this is a still secondary topic for us now, so we will focus on Marion. It is important to understand that she does not need money in itself, just like a promotion at work or a formal marriage. These are just tools that will ultimately allow her to express her desires and feelings to the fullest. These two just want to be together and not feel pressure from outside. It was in a conversation with Norman in his office that Marion realized the similarity on their conditions. She literally saw himself in him, with the only difference that the guy's position was already hopeless and she still had a chance to jump off. Here is the phrase that unites two characters into a single whole.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
Marion realized that she had stumbled and that if she continued to do what she was doing, she would only make her situation worse. She's already practically a criminal, but it's not too late to return the money and try to atone. And this is exactly the decision she makes. Upon returning to the room, the woman takes a bath, trying to symbolically wash off a scene where she was killed in one of the most famous scenes in cinema history. Thus, globally, Phycho is about the conflict of generations and the pressure of the burden of the past over the present. The voice of evil, both in the case of Norman and Marion, is really one. It's an old, sinister Victorian-style hut on a hill where female sexuality is locked away. And as long as this hut exists in our minds, there will be consequences that will have to be sorted out by more than one generation. Now let's jump over almost 2 decades into the future. Director John Carpenter, little known at this time, created an iconic movie called Halloween. Its merits for the genre, it seems to me, are quite comparable to those of Phycho. It is not for nothing that this work was included in the US National Registry. The story is about a little 6-year-old boy named Michael Myers, who in the midst of Halloween celebrations kills his older sister in cold blood. And after 15 years in a psychiatric hospital, Michael breaks free and returns to his hometown of Haddonfield. There he tracks down teenage girls working as babysitters and kills one by one. Only the main character, Laurie Strode, remains alive, to whose rescue at the last moment comes Mr. Loomis, Michael's attending physician. The director has repeatedly stated that Hitchcock's Phycho was the main inspiration for Halloween, and that's why both films have similar themes. Let's try to understand the main idea of Halloween. Without exceptions, all the killed teenagers in Halloween were noticed drinking alcohol or smoking, were dressed brightly and provocatively. They only cared about having fun, which is what distinguishes them from Laurie, a modest girl with an armful of books under her arm. On the contrary, she wears closed clothes, behaves decently constantly and, unlike her friends, never appears naked in the frame. Laurie is responsible and does her job as a babysitter flawlessly, even risking her life for other people's children, which seems to convey the idea that she's caring and will most likely become a wonderful mother in the future, while her friends simply dumped their children on her, and in general, they initially agreed to babysitting solely for the sake of gaining access to a place for sex.
The only reason she babysits is to have a place to...
Laurie is complete innocent and she is the only one destined to survive at the end of the film. These simply observations lead to the following thoughts. Michael Myers apparently personifies the inevitable punishment for the younger generation, whose path in life is clearly taking a wrong turn. But this interpretation, despite its consistency, is fundamentally incorrect. You see, initially, Michael Myers didn't give a damn about all these guys and girls. It's not that he's not curious about interacting with them, it's just that he shouldn't forget that it was Laurie who first interested our killer. It is she who he constantly pursued throughout the film. It is she who listens to the teacher's words about imminent fate, and then is successively lured into the house by Michael, blocked by him in a room, then in a closet, forcing her to begin to defend herself with fragile items of woman's everyday life, and in the end to experience a symbolic session of psychotherapy. The problem was never with horny teenagers, but solely with one particular girl in whom Michael saw a kindred spirit. Carpenter put it this way.
Part of the reputation of Halloween is that all the girls who are promiscuous are the ones that get killed. But my thought was that Jamie Lee Curtis's character is more like the killer because she's repressed. The other girls are just acting normally. They're just normal teenagers.
The director repeatedly emphasized that the behavior of teenagers is absolutely normal. This is exactly how they would behave if they were given complete freedom of sexual expression. When critics said that Halloween punishes female sexuality, director John Carpenter responded, "The critics completely missed the boat here, I think. Because if you turn it around, the one girl who's the most sexually uptight just keeps stabbing the guy with a long knife. She's the most sexually frustrated. She's the one that killed him. Not because she's a virgin, but because all the repressed energy starts coming out. She uses all those phallic symbols on the guy. She and the killer have a certain link, sexual repression. Laurie is the kind of girl whose parents are often proud of, and whom teachers usually set as an example. But at the same time, on a personal level, Laurie is deeply unhappy and lonely. She envies her friends and on the one hand wants to be in their place, go on dates with guys and smoke weed. But on the other hand, she's afraid of this more than anyone else. Laurie is in love with a classmate and wants to invite him to the prom, but she cannot do this due to her upbringing and mental attitudes implanted in her head by her parents and society. Laurie is the only one who sees Michael Myers because her attention is constantly outwards, and it looks out, of course, for men. The parallels here are quite simple and obvious.
Laurie, dear. He wants to talk to you. He wants to take you out tonight.
He was standing right there.
Poor Laurie. Scared another one away.
I think you're wacko. Now you're seeing men behind bushes.
I saw somebody standing in Mr. Riddle's backyard.
Probably Mr. Riddle.
He's watching me.
Mr. Riddle was watching you? Laurie, Mr. Riddle is 87.
Laurie constantly suppresses her eternal impulses and emotions, which do not disappear anywhere, but accumulate inside her unconscious and sooner or later will definitely find a way out. When analyzing Halloween, it would also be a good idea to keep Freud's ideas in mind, as was in the case with Phycho, if only because Carpenter himself uses his descriptive system when talking about his brainchild. For example, hear what he says about the opening scene and Michael's motives.
There's the pointed girl necking, and this is the killer's sister, back in '63. He's going to kill her in a little bit for sexual reasons.
The reason for the murder of the sister lies on a sexual plane. It's not for nothing that Michael put a phallic mask of her lover during the violence. This, by the way, isn't my interpretation, but again the words of the director.
Kind of phallic-looking mask there.
That's Deborah Hill again.
Michael, like Norman Bates, spies on his sister, changing clothes, and is overcome by a contradictory and previously unknown range of feelings, sexual arousal, which is immediately suppressed, creating frustration, which transforms into rage. All I can say about the Myers only kills girls having sex issue is that the story starts with a little boy seeing her sister fucking her boyfriend upstairs and killing her for it. So it seems to me that part of what he's doing is getting vengeance of her because of an Oedipal or incestual thing. Norman Bates, if you remember, also killed his mother because their relationship went far beyond the mother and son model.
Then she met a man, and it seemed to Norman that she threw him over for this man. Now that pushed him over the line and he killed them both.
Well, a son is a poor substitute for a lover.
Here you may have a natural question. Okay, this may work in the case of Norman, but how does all this apply to a 6-year-old boy? He's still a child. What sexual motives are there? The point is that it would be a mistake to perceive Michael as just a person. The director did a lot of work to give the viewer the feeling that this is not a creature of flesh and blood, but rather a ghost, white face, posing among the underwear blowing in the wind, and even putting it on himself in one of the scenes. Instant disappearance, supernatural skills for entering closed space, and much more come in handy here. Halloween is a mix of urban folklore, urban legends, and horror stories. In the film, the boys scare each other with the story of Michael Myers, and in class they compare him to an abstract force of nature, an element like water or fire. At the same time, Michael Myers is the spirit of the gloomy and at the same time cheerful holiday of Halloween, in which the living of the present gain the opportunity to contact the already dead people of the past. Norman Bates had a certain background and history, while Michael was almost completely devoid of all of these. He's a kind of personification of a doom of familiar American life, an inevitable payoff for established norms and traditions, which will come sooner or later. At the time this film was released, conservative and religious upbringing was mainstream in American society, as was a strictly regimented family structure, strong family ties, and traditions were the highest value. Everything else was declared as sin, such as sex before or outside marriage, divorce, civil union, reluctance to have children, or non-heterosexual relationship. Imagine how the ideas of Freud were perceived in this environment, who said that sexuality in all its manifestations is the norm and an integral part of growing up and the formation of a healthy human psyche. Moreover, the overwhelming number of problems arise not because of dissolute life, but on the contrary due to the fact that our natural feelings are fanatically suppressed. Skeletons in the closet cannot be accumulated forever. There will definitely come a time when the burden becomes unbearable, and the search of violence will be a natural form of getting rid of it. Michael Myers is the same Norman Bates at his core. He's literally a child in the body of an adult man whose development was frozen for 15 years.
You haven't anything to worry about. He hasn't spoken a word in 15 years.
To some extent, he's as young a resident of Haddonfield as any other elementary school student. Michael loves to peep, play hide and seek, and visit neighbors' houses on Halloween to collect sweets. Here, children's treats are clearly equated with treats for adults.
I don't know yet. I have to get out of taking my little brother trick-or-treating.
Saving treats for Bob.
Funny.
That's what Michael is here for. His murders of teenagers were again preceded by sexual arousal. And why do you think the director builds entire scenes like the one in which a half-naked girl is comically stuck in a window? Observing this turns on Michael, and then, as in the case of Norman, she suffers a frustration due to the contradictions in his head, and as a result, the only tool to release available to him is used, cold-blooded murder by strangulation or a penetration blow with a phallic-shaped knife. In the first case, it was almost a reflexive decision, but later it became a natural mechanism of self-satisfaction. Here are some more interesting words from Carpenter about this. I mean, all he does is kill. Did he ever get laid? I don't think he was able to. He was fucked up. I think he got confused between fucking and kill. Sex and violence come together in Michael. These two entities are in principle impossible without each other. They are two sides of the same coin, and it would not be an exaggeration to say that entire horror genre, one way or another, is built on flirting with this theme. In Halloween, the maniac is constantly confused with lovers, and the dying moans of the victims with moans of pleasure.
All right, Annie. First I get your famous chewing, now I get your famous squealing.
Strangulation as a method of murder here, as you understand, was also not chosen by chance. There are people who enjoy it. The woman's theme was generally quite popular in those years. Here a couple of examples. Remember Carrie by Brian De Palma, a film about a girl raised in a religious environment by her fanatical mother, for whom everything related to sex was the highest sin. Carrie's first period went from a natural process for a woman to something humiliating and frightening. She began to grow up and at the same time turn into a monster in her own eyes. Carrie suppresses her interest in the opposite sex in every possible way, and then at the climax it all spills out in a form of psychic madness. In Hellraiser, the bride cheats on her future husband just before the wedding. He's polite and caring, ideal for family life, but doesn't satisfy Julia's other desires. Again, a familiar contradiction that ultimately turns a woman into a cold-blooded killer. Julia literally recreates for herself a new husband, ideal in all respects, collecting him from the flesh of various lustful men, and then envelops his Frankenstein in the skin of her pliable hand-packed man. At the center of such films is repressed female sexuality, which must be controlled either by religion, social norms, or even science. Otherwise, ghosts will begin to wake up everywhere in sleepy towns.